All right, so skill 39 brings us to the science section. And the first thing that's really important is how do you approach the overall passage question kind of strategy? And this skill is called read less, and that's the main idea is you should be going pretty quickly to the questions. And I'm going to talk about this in more detail. So, what most students do is approach the science section like a reading comprehension section. They read the passage and then they answer the questions and then they repeat, right? But this is almost always a mistake. Most of the words in the science passages are unnecessary compared to the graphs. That's what's important. That's where almost all the information we need is located. And worse than that, reading these words wastes time because they don't often ask about what the words say. They ask about what the graphs say. And time is in very short supply, especially on the ACT science section. So some students do very well. In fact, most students do very well by going right to the questions and not looking at anything in the passage beforehand. That can feel weird at first, but you should definitely give it a try. Okay. If you do this, you will have to go back and look at the charts and graphs because they're going to ask about that all the time. You're going to have to go back and even read some of the text, but you will be doing all of that in a very focused and targeted manner, right? You're not going to be wasting time reading a bunch of stuff and looking at charts and graphs without knowing why you're doing it, without wasting time with stuff that they never ask about. So for about 3/4 of students, this ends up being the best way to do the science section. All right. And just a little note, except for the fighting scientists section, that's the part where it's almost always just text and no charts. You should skim the text before hitting the questions. But that's only one of the passages out of the 6 passages on the science section. Some students do feel a little nervous about just going to the questions without looking at the passage at all. If that's you, then try this. On any passage, again, other than the fighting scientists, start by scanning around the italicized words and look for definitions. These are the technical words that will often be what the passage is really about and that you're not going to be familiar with. So look at those and then just look at the graphs and figures and make sure you get a very basic picture. All right, this graph is telling me about how much precipitation there is on the Mars, whatever, okay? And that would be enough, and then go to the questions. That way, this should take like 45 seconds to a minute, really not more than a minute, and then you can go to the questions and you'll feel like you have some handle on what's going on. The rare student can skim everything very quickly in like 30 seconds, understand a good chunk of it, and then hit the questions. You can try that too. But for most, it's a waste of time and energy since they don't ask about a lot of the stuff that you would actually be spending time reading. So again, for most students, and this has happened a million times where a student comes to me and says, I run out of time on the science section all the time. And then I say, are you reading the passage? And they say, yes. And I say, all right, well, let's try it once where you just skip the passage entirely and go right to the questions. And almost always that gets pretty close to solving their timing issues. All right. Remember, no matter what, you will have to go back and look at most of the charts and graphs and some of the text, and for some passages, all of the text when you're answering the questions. But you're doing it much more efficiently and quickly when you do it by, in terms of reading a question and then going and finding what they're asking you to find, as opposed to doing it all first, which is a much more generally inefficient way of doing it.